All right, thank you, everyone. I would like to take a moment to introduce my partners in crime in terms of studying materials in African art. Casey Mallinckrodt first. Casey is an objects conservator who is currently working on the Andrew Mellon Foundation funded conservation initiative in African art at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. This project aligns with Casey's primary interest in the stewardship of material cultural heritage and the relationship between the knowledge of the materials and retention and repopulation of historical knowledge. Her current research focus is the significance of specific wood species in the creation of power objects in the historic arts of Africa and the impacts of overharvesting and punitive deforestation in colonial and post-colonial periods. Casey received a master's degree from the UCLA Getty program in the conservation of archaeological and ethnographic materials. This presentation will be co-presented by Ashley Dierkoop, a curatorial associate for African art. Ashley specializes in 20th century art and also African art. She holds an MA in critical and curatorial studies from Columbia University and a BA in art history from Bard College. Prior to relocating to Richmond, Ashley held curatorial positions at the Dia Foundation for the Arts and at Art in Buildings in New York City. Their presentation is Life and or Afterlife, African Power Figures in Western Museums. Please join me in thanking them.
Thank you so much, Jen, and it's such a pleasure and a privilege to be here. And I hope it's equally so to work the... there we go. Yes. So we're over the first hurdle. As Jen said, Ashley and I are part of the team of conservators and curators working on this 3-year Mellon grant. And I'm going to give you a summary introduction to the project, and then Ashley is going to speak on the more subtle aspects of it. We're examining several different types of objects, but an important focus has been on ritual objects, figures that were able to impact the lives of people in the communities of their belief systems, and objects that have been removed from that context under many different and difficult, complex circumstances. This project is by design a conservator-curator partnership and has included ongoing consultations with visiting curators, scientists like Jen Mass, conservators, and scholars, and included travel for research and to build partnerships with museums that have related collections. This and other projects, including others funded by the Mellon Foundation, are focusing attention and investing money to increase the body of knowledge about African material culture in U.S. and European museums in order to repopulate lost histories and engage issues specific to the conservation and stewardship, exhibition, and presentation of African material culture. These considerations, of course, relate to cultural heritage broadly. Important research has been done and published, particularly in the last few decades, but there's a relative dearth of technical information about materials and methods of manufacture and the integration of that information generated through conservation research into the scholarship. Conservators carrying out technical analyses are expected to use refined technologies to produce unambiguous results, and there's a lot at stake in accuracy. Retaining evidence, possible source codes, correcting and preventing incorrect narratives, guiding treatment decisions, including stabilization that may dramatically change the originally intended arc of an object's active life, and establishing or questioning the authenticity that may have significant legal ramifications, notably as requests for repatriation are being recognized and acted on. The grant has provided funds to purchase analytic equipment and invest in training and engage consultants, including Jen, to carry out more complex analysis than we're able to do in the lab and to aid us in evaluating our results. We've partnered with various research labs, including at the Virginia Commonwealth University and Medical School. The most engaging of those has been with the mass spectrometry proteomics lab to analyze proteinaceous materials to determine the type and identify the source species. I think it's relevant to point out that my colleagues and I are conservators, not conservation scientists. And that speaks to the importance of the collaborations. But also I want to add that we work to a model that's, I think, been established by conservators of material culture, of ethnographic collections, whose work has already and long involved diagnosis to seek collaboration, to integrate scholarly and scientific understanding and complicated histories and living communities for which these objects are immediately and historically meaningful. Conservators are aware that any action can change an object, but with cultural heritage, there's an imperative to protect what we don't know is there, and often to protect what isn't there materially. And with analytic technologies capable of extracting highly resolved material identification, the stewardship of privileged, secret information gains added refinement. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about 3 objects that have been part of the work we've been doing. This is a Sangay community in Kishi of the Eke people, or community. In Kishi have a protective role and are empowered by added materials and actions. The steps of examination, X-ray, UV imaging, and infrared spectroscopy led to having peptide sequencing done of the spongy material embedded in the navel, hips, and shoulders. The results were analyzed against the UniPro database using a search algorithm optimized for proteomics. The scaffolding result, the analytic results found a strong match with bone, but it identified the American mastodon that's been extinct for 11 million years and was endemic to North America. This is a problematic result of the sort that could generate some truly terrible scholarship, but exemplifies the challenges conservators may encounter in building transdisciplinary partnerships. It has led to a deepened collaboration with Dr. Christina Nelson, who heads the lab, to identify and to test different protocols for sample preparation and curating the database search parameters. And together we're preparing a paper on this for an upcoming conservation conference. Though these results will be reanalyzed, bovine or canine bone are more viable results, although Dunya Herzog, a scholar who's written extensively on Sangay material culture, predicted human bone, a result that would have engaged significant ethical issues. But all the information we're generating requires comparison and speaks to the need for more studies, more comparison with other studies. And to this end, we're working with conservators at the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam and the Fowler Museum of UCLA, investigating Sangay and Kishi and other ritual objects. And of note, the Fowler has recently received a similarly focused Mellon Foundation grant. Ingenue is a powerful water spirit who can influence prosperity and fertility. I'll touch on 3 points of interest from, 3 points of interest from our work: the discovery of new information, consultation with the source community, and the stabilization treatment. Because of paint losses, we were able to observe otherwise hidden elliptical areas on the back and the right arm. X-rays show that there are carved out spaces containing fibrous materials and dense fragments, but also reveal a previously unknown feature, that the eyes were excavated and filled with a dense material that's penetrated by horizontal slits, obscured now by paint. Our former colleague, now curator of African art at the New Orleans Art Museum, Ndi Ezoluwomba, who is Nigerian, did field work on these and other details we generated. But he primarily encountered antagonism to the historic belief systems and fear of repercussions because of the pressure from the Catholic Church that's very powerful in this region. He found some pockets of traditional knowledge in rural areas, and as well as their appreciation for our interest, but no information about the secrets of the figure. The imperative and the challenges to creating these collaborations is old news to conservators and curators of many cultural heritage collections. And stabilization, deactivating the active material. The white paint is essentially unbound and was, to some extent, still is actively unstable. But it was not intended to persist. The figure was beautified, it was repainted before it was presented by its caretakers to adherents for veneration. evident in successive layers of paint and different types of paint over the figure: clay, kaolinite, and white lead. Prior to acquisition, much of the paint had flaked off and some of it had been wiped off. The treatment has tried to curtail any further losses and stabilize the appearance as a sort of snapshot of its moment of acquisition, but alien to the way in its other life it was ever intended to be viewed. It has not, on the other hand, been stripped to abstraction by the removal of the paint or reanimated by imitative paint, and both have been and continue to be done to collections of material culture in Western museums. On the other hand, we have chosen to leave our ingenue in the bardo. Ashley and I have been studying a Boccio, a Vodun power figure from Benin. Ashley's research and the unusually rich provenance of this object have guided the examination. I'm going to give an abbreviated overview of the figure and the analysis done to ground some of Ashley's later discussion, and I'm going to use some of the images that are now on exhibit with the object in the museum for public information. The underlying form is a carved wood Janus figure to which objects, materials, and substances have been applied to transform the assembly into a presence that is active. Objects and substances continue to be added and accumulated over the course of its use life. This accumulation has resulted in a unified appearance, but it obscures, makes difficult to observe the component parts. The thick black coating on the head, upper body, and some attachments is primarily blood. Under magnification, the samples appear to be mixtures that include kaolinite, ultramarine blue, plant fibers, often feather fragments, quartz, and iron oxide. Peptide sequencing determined that the sample is comprised of goat blood, though other types of blood, chicken and human, may be present. There are small splatters and accretions of blue powder over the figure consistent with known Vodun practice. Laundry bluing was reported to have been used, and in the mid-late 20th century may have been made of Prussian blue, ultramarine, synthetic dyes, and an earlier period indigo. Infrared spectroscopy and microscopic analysis of the samples was consistent with ultramarine blue, although I may not have found other things that were present. White washes and accretions are consistent with kaolinite using infrared spectroscopy, microscopy, and X-ray diffraction spectroscopy. Samples of unprocessed kaolinite provided by the geology lab at the Africa Museum Tervuren, formerly the Royal Museum for Central Africa, have provided very useful comparisons. There are accretions of reddish heterogeneous iron-rich soils, as well as starch grains that may remain from libations that may have been food that was chewed or spit on the figure during use. And now moving from the inside out, the wood appears to be consistent with Melicia excelsa, a rocco that's known to have been used in these figures. The underlying form is outlined to the right. Unanimated forms can be purchased in the markets. Plant fibers are held vertically on the sides of the figure with twisted plant stems. Strips of leather, each with a black coating, hang from the shoulder around the figure and are bound in place with white cotton. There's a stylized blade, a hevioso, inserted under the cord. 2 pieces of red cotton commercial textile cover the shoulder. And cowrie shells, bells, whistles, keychains, locks and keys, and containers, gourds, and commercially manufactured glass bottles are tied to the leather strips or placed or hung on the figure. This summary is intended to give you a largely unambiguous presentation of the Boccio and its manufacture, and Ashley is going to address our work from a different angle.